A retired SWAT commander with 30 years of tactical experience just revealed something that changes everything we thought we knew about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Something the FBI found in the house next door to Nancy. Something that's been kept quiet for 49 days. Something that explains how someone could have watched Nancy for weeks without anyone noticing. Something that tells us this wasn't a stranger operating from a distance. This was someone who had access. Someone who could observe Nancy's routine day after day. Someone who could see when she came home and when she left. Someone who could watch who visited and when the house was empty. Someone who knew exactly when to make their move. The retired SWAT commander, a man who spent decades planning and executing high-risk tactical operations, who understands surveillance and reconnaissance better than almost anyone, examined the evidence in Nancy's case and immediately focused on one critical question that everyone else seemed to miss. How did the kidnapper know Nancy's exact routine? How did they know she'd be home alone that night? How did they know when she'd be asleep? How did they know the house would be vulnerable? The answer, according to this tactical expert, isn't complicated surveillance equipment or weeks of following Nancy around Tucson. The answer is much simpler and much more disturbing. The kidnapper had a vantage point. A location from which Nancy's house could be watched directly. A place close enough to see movement, to notice patterns, to understand routines. And the FBI found evidence that the house next door to Nancy, a house that should have been empty, a house that was supposedly vacant, had signs of recent occupation, signs that someone had been there, someone who shouldn't have been, someone who was watching. Before we examine what the retired SWAT commander revealed about the house next door and what the FBI discovered there that points toward surveillance of Nancy Guthrie, make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Vault and have notifications turned on. We bring you expert tactical analysis from people who spent careers in law enforcement and who understand how criminals actually operate. Hit that subscribe button right now. Smash the like button to support investigative coverage that examines angles mainstream media misses. Drop a comment telling us whether you think surveillance from next door explains how the kidnapper knew Nancy's routine. Your engagement helps this content reach people who might have critical information. Now let's examine exactly what was found in the house next door and why a retired SWAT commander says this changes everything. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, disappeared from her Catalina Foothills home in Tucson, Arizona in the early morning hours of February 1, 2026. She was last seen at 9:50 p.m. on January 31st when her son-in-law Tommaso dropped her off after a family gathering at her daughter Annie's house. At 2:12 a.m. on February 1st, motion was detected inside Nancy's house. At 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker disconnected from her phone, indicating she had been moved far enough away that the Bluetooth connection severed. She's been missing for 49 days. And during those 49 days, investigators have been working to understand how someone could have targeted Nancy so precisely. How someone could have known her routine well enough to strike at exactly the right moment when she was home alone and vulnerable. The retired SWAT commander who analyzed this case brings a perspective that's different from traditional detectives or FBI profilers. His name is being kept confidential at his request because he's still involved in consulting work that requires discretion. But his credentials are impeccable. 30 years in law enforcement, 20 of those years on SWAT teams including 15 as a team commander, hundreds of high-risk operations including hostage rescues, barricaded suspects, warrant executions on dangerous criminals. He understands how tactical operations are planned. He understands reconnaissance and surveillance. He understands how criminals gather intelligence about targets before striking. And when he looked at Nancy's case, he immediately saw something that bothered him. The kidnapper knew too much. Knew when Nancy would be home, knew when she'd be alone, knew she'd be asleep and vulnerable, knew the layout well enough to position a vehicle at the exact right spot on the driveway. That level of knowledge doesn't come from casual observation or lucky guessing. That level of knowledge comes from sustained surveillance, from watching over time, from observing patterns and routines until you understand them completely. The SWAT commander's question was simple. Where did the surveillance happen from? How did someone watch Nancy without being noticed themselves? The Catalina Foothills is an upscale neighborhood where people notice unfamiliar vehicles, where someone sitting in a parked car for hours would draw attention, where neighbors watch out for each other. You can't just park on the street day after day watching a house without someone calling the police about suspicious activity. So how did surveillance happen? The SWAT commander's answer, based on his tactical experience and based on what he's learned about the investigation, is that surveillance happened from the house next door, and the FBI found evidence supporting that theory. Evidence that someone had been in that house. Evidence that someone had been watching Nancy from a location that provided direct line of sight to her property. Evidence that this wasn't random crime by a stranger but targeted abduction by someone who used the vacant house next door as a surveillance post. Let's talk about what makes the house next door significant and why it would be the perfect surveillance location. In the Catalina foothills, houses are spread out. Large lots, privacy, distance between properties. But next door is still next door. Even with space between houses, the house next door has visual access to Nancy's property that no other location would have. You can see the front entrance. You can see the driveway. You can see when lights go on and off. You can see when vehicles arrive and depart. You can see movement through windows if curtains are open. You can observe everything happening at the target property from a stationary position that doesn't draw any attention because it's just a house and houses are supposed to have people in them. But here's what makes it perfect for surveillance in Nancy's case. According to the SWAT commander's analysis, the house next door to Nancy was vacant. The owners were away. The property was supposed to be empty. And an empty house next to your target is a surveillance goldmine because you can enter it, position yourself where you have optimal view of the target property, and watch for as long as you need without anyone questioning why you're there. If someone drives by and sees movement in the house or sees a light on, they assume the owners came back or someone is house sitting or maintenance workers are there. They don't assume criminal surveillance. They don't call police. They don't investigate. You're hiding in plain sight. The retired SWAT commander explained that in tactical operations, establishing an observation post is one of the first steps in planning. You need to know what you're dealing with. You need to understand the target's patterns. You need to identify vulnerabilities and opportunities. And the best observation posts are locations that provide good sight lines while appearing completely normal and unremarkable. An empty house next door to your target checks every box. Sight lines are perfect because you're right next to the target property. Appearance is normal because it's just a house. Risk of discovery is low because empty houses don't have occupants who would notice you're there. The SWAT commander went into detail about how professional surveillance operations work and why the vacant house next door would be chosen over other options. When planning surveillance, you evaluate multiple factors: distance from target, quality of sight lines, ability to observe without being observed, duration you can maintain the position, ease of access and exit, risk of detection or interruption. A vacant house next door scores perfectly on every single factor. Distance is minimal. You're right next to the property you're watching. Sight lines are excellent. You can see the front entrance, driveway, windows, movements. Ability to observe without being observed is maximized because you're inside a structure where you can watch through windows without being visible from outside. Duration is unlimited. You can stay as long as you need without time pressure. Access and exit are straightforward. You enter when no one is watching and leave the same way. Risk of detection is minimal because the house is supposed to be empty, and neighbors won't think twice about occasional presence. Compare that to trying to conduct surveillance from a vehicle parked on the street. You're visible to everyone. Neighbors will notice an unfamiliar vehicle. Police patrol might stop and ask questions. You can only stay for limited time before it becomes obvious what you're doing. Sight lines are limited to what you can see from street level. Weather affects your ability to observe. You can't use optical equipment like binoculars without being extremely obvious. Every single advantage the vacant house provides is lost when you try to conduct surveillance from a vehicle or from public spaces. Now let's talk about what the FBI reportedly found in that house next door. According to the SWAT commander's information from sources close to the investigation, FBI agents who were conducting a thorough neighborhood canvass checked the vacant house next door to Nancy. They did what investigators should always do in major cases. They checked every property within a certain radius. They talked to every neighbor. They examined every location that might provide information. And when they entered the vacant house next door with permission from the owners who were out of state, they found signs of recent occupation. Not occupation by the owners, not occupation by anyone who had legitimate reason to be there, but signs that someone had been in that house recently, someone who shouldn't have been. The specific details of what was found haven't been made public and likely won't be until there's an arrest. because investigators don't want to reveal evidence that only the perpetrator would know about. But the SWAT commander indicated the evidence includes things like disturbed dust patterns in locations where someone would position themselves to look out windows toward Nancy's house. When a house sits vacant for extended periods, dust accumulates on floors and surfaces in predictable patterns. If someone walks through that house, if someone positions furniture near windows, if someone spends time in specific rooms, those activities disturb the dust in ways that are visible to trained investigators. The FBI would document these disturbances photographically and analyze them to determine where the occupant spent time and what they were doing. Traces of food or beverage consumption suggest someone spent extended time there. Empty bottles or cans, food wrappers, evidence of meals being consumed. All of that indicates presence over hours, not just quick entry and exit. The SWAT commander noted that surveillance operations require patience and endurance. You're sitting in one place for hours watching. You bring food and drinks. You leave containers behind. And in a vacant house where no one is supposed to be eating or drinking, those containers become evidence. Possibly cigarette butts or other items indicating presence and potentially providing DNA evidence. If someone smoked while conducting surveillance, those cigarette butts are evidence gold. They contain saliva which contains DNA. The FBI can test those butts and get a full DNA profile of whoever smoked them. And critically, according to the commander, evidence of observation equipment. Not sophisticated spy gear, but simple items like binoculars or cameras, or even just a chair positioned at a window with direct sight line to Nancy's property. The SWAT commander emphasized that professional surveillance doesn't require expensive equipment. A decent pair of binoculars costing less than $100 provides sufficient magnification to observe a neighboring property in detail. You can see people moving inside through windows. You can read license plates on vehicles. You can identify faces. You can monitor activity patterns. A camera with a telephoto lens provides even more capability if someone wants to document observations. But even without optical aids, simply positioning yourself at a window in the vacant house gives you direct view of Nancy's property sufficient to learn her routine. The timeline of when this occupation occurred is what makes it so significant. The evidence suggests someone was in that vacant house in the days or weeks before Nancy disappeared. Not years ago. Recently. And the location where evidence was concentrated, near windows facing Nancy's property, makes the purpose clear. This wasn't someone breaking into a vacant house to steal things. Burglars look for valuables to take. They search bedrooms, offices, closets. They don't spend hours sitting at windows overlooking the neighboring property. This wasn't transients looking for shelter. People seeking shelter use the entire house, sleep in beds, use bathrooms, leave evidence throughout the property. But evidence concentrated near windows facing Nancy's house indicates a specific purpose: observation, surveillance, intelligence gathering. The SWAT commander walked through what that surveillance would have revealed to anyone watching from next door. First, Nancy's daily patterns. When lights go on in the morning, indicating she's awake. What room she uses during the day. When lights go off at night, indicating she's going to bed. Over several days of observation, you'd see consistency in these patterns. Nancy wakes around the same time each day. She goes to bed around the same time each night. That consistency tells you when she's vulnerable, when she's asleep and unable to respond to threats. Second, you'd see Nancy's mobility and physical capabilities. Watching her move from room to room, watching her go outside to check mail or water plants, watching her walk to and from vehicles when leaving or returning home. You'd see she moves slowly. You'd see she has limitations. You'd understand she couldn't run, couldn't fight effectively, couldn't physically resist someone younger and stronger. That assessment of physical vulnerability is critical for planning. An abductor targeting an elderly victim needs to know what level of force or coercion will be required. Third, you'd see who visits Nancy and how often. Family members coming for visits, friends stopping by, delivery people bringing packages, service providers working on the property. Each visitor tells you something. Regular family visits mean the family is involved and attentive. That's important because it affects how quickly Nancy would be reported missing if she disappeared. Frequent service providers mean people have access to the property and might notice if something seems off. All of that intelligence informs operational planning. Fourth, you'd see patterns around Nancy leaving and returning. Does she go out every day or only occasionally? What time does she leave? What time does she return? Who drives her? Watching over multiple days, you'd see Nancy doesn't drive herself. She's either driven by family or uses Uber. You'd see she goes out for specific purposes, family gatherings, church, appointments, and returns home afterward. You'd learn that she doesn't travel spontaneously or unpredictably. Her schedule is consistent and observable. Fifth, you'd see security measures Nancy has in place. The doorbell camera at the front entrance is visible from outside. Watching the house, you'd note where it's positioned and what it can see. You'd observe whether lights are on timers or controlled manually. You'd see whether windows have security contacts, whether there's an alarm system sign in the yard. All of that tells you what you need to defeat or work around when you make your move. Sixth, you'd see the layout of the property and the logistics of access. Where vehicles park in the driveway, how far the walk is from front door to driveway, what the sight lines are from neighboring houses, whether there are motion-activated lights, whether there's cover or concealment approaching the house. All of that operational intelligence allows you to plan exact movements, exact positioning, exact timing. The SWAT commander emphasized that every single one of these pieces of information is observable from the vacant house next door, with nothing more than patient watching and basic optical aids like binoculars. You don't need sophisticated surveillance equipment. You don't need to hack security systems or access digital records. You don't need electronic monitoring devices. You just need time and a good vantage point. And the house next door provides both. You can sit comfortably inside, positioned at a window, watching Nancy's house hour after hour, day after day, until you understand her routine completely, until you know exactly when to strike and how to execute the abduction with minimal risk. What makes this evidence so significant for the investigation is that it dramatically narrows the suspect pool. Not everyone could have conducted surveillance from the vacant house next door. The requirements are specific and limiting. First requirement, knowledge that the house was vacant. That's not information you get from driving through the neighborhood once. Vacant houses in upscale areas like the Catalina foothills don't advertise their status. There's no for sale sign saying owners moved out. There's no notice on the door. The house looks from the outside like any other occupied house. Lawns are maintained by landscaping services. Mail is collected or forwarded. The property doesn't show visible signs of vacancy. So knowing the house was actually empty requires insider knowledge. Either you live very close by and notice the pattern of no one coming or going over extended period, or you work in the neighborhood regularly and observe the house is vacant, or you have some connection to the property, the owners, or real estate in the area that gave you access to information about vacancy. Second requirement, ability to gain access to the vacant house. If the house was locked and secured properly, gaining access requires either breaking in or having a key. Breaking in leaves evidence: forced doors, broken windows, damaged locks. If the FBI found evidence someone was in the house but didn't find evidence of forced entry, that suggests the person either had a key or found the house unlocked. Having a key implies connection to the property or the owners. Maybe someone who worked on the property and kept a copy of the key they were given. Maybe someone in real estate or property management who has access to keys. Finding the house unlocked still requires knowledge of where unlocked entry points might be. All roads lead back to someone with local knowledge and insider access. Third requirement, comfort and familiarity operating in that area. Entering a vacant house repeatedly over days or weeks to conduct surveillance requires confidence you won't be caught. Requires understanding neighborhood patterns well enough to know when you can come and go without being noticed. Requires local knowledge about police patrol patterns, neighborhood watch activity, how observant neighbors are. Someone from outside the area wouldn't have that comfort level. Someone local who lives or works in the Catalina foothills would. Fourth requirement, understanding of surveillance principles. While surveillance itself isn't complicated, understanding that you need surveillance, that gathering intelligence about your target's routine is essential to successful operation, requires criminal sophistication or professional background. The SWAT commander noted that career criminals who commit targeted crimes understand reconnaissance. They know you don't just walk up to a target and hope for the best. You watch first, you learn, you plan. Someone with that mindset looked at Nancy as a target and recognized the need for surveillance, and identified the vacant house next door as the perfect observation post. All four requirements point towards someone with specific characteristics. Local to the Catalina foothills. connected to the neighborhood through residence or work, familiar enough with the area to notice a vacant house and recognize its value for surveillance, comfortable accessing vacant properties either through keys or knowledge of security vulnerabilities, and criminally sophisticated enough to understand the importance of reconnaissance before action. That's not a random burglar. That's not someone passing through Tucson looking for opportunity. That's someone embedded in the local area with specific knowledge and specific capabilities. The SWAT commander believes strongly, based on all available evidence, that this case involves someone with a service connection to the neighborhood, someone who works on properties in the area providing services like landscaping, pool maintenance, home repairs, property management, real estate services, someone whose presence in the Catalina foothills is normal and unremarkable, someone who neighbors see regularly enough that they don't question their presence, someone who would notice a vacant house because they're in the neighborhood often, someone who might have access to keys because that's part of how service providers operate, someone who could enter the vacant house during daytime hours when they're supposed to be working in the area without anyone thinking it's suspicious. This theory aligns perfectly with what former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer has stated repeatedly about her belief that this case involves people with tangential connection to Nancy or her household, someone who encountered Nancy or her property through providing services, someone who used that legitimate access to gather information, and in this case, someone who went further and used the vacant house next door as a surveillance post to gather detailed intelligence about Nancy's routine and vulnerability without ever directly interacting with her or raising her suspicion. Subscribe to True Crime Vault and turn on notifications for continued expert tactical analysis. Like this video to support coverage that brings perspectives from professionals who understand how criminals actually operate. Visit our channel for comprehensive coverage of Nancy's case. Comment with your thoughts on whether the vacant house next door explains the surveillance. And if you have information, contact FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900. $1.2 million reward is waiting. Now let's examine what the FBI is doing with the evidence from the vacant house and how it might lead to identification. The FBI's processing of the vacant house next door would follow established protocols for crime scene investigation, even though the house itself isn't technically a crime scene in the traditional sense. It's a location related to the crime, a location where the suspect spent time, a location that can provide evidence. The processing would be methodical and comprehensive. First, photography. Before touching anything, before collecting anything, FBI technicians would photograph the entire house, documenting exactly how it was found. Wide shots showing overall room layouts, close-ups of specific items or disturbances, photos from multiple angles of windows that provide sightlines to Nancy's house. All of this creates a permanent record of the scene as it existed when discovered. Second, fingerprint examination. Every surface that someone conducting surveillance might touch gets examined for latent fingerprints. Windowsills where someone might lean while watching, door handles used to enter and exit rooms, chairs or furniture that might have been moved to better positions for observation, light switches if lights were used, any containers for food or beverages. Modern fingerprint technology can recover prints from surfaces that seem unlikely to hold them, and a single fingerprint that matches a suspect can be powerful evidence connecting that person to the location. Third, DNA collection. Any items that would have contacted the occupant's mouth or body fluids are collected for DNA analysis. Cigarette butts are ideal because they contain saliva. Food or beverage containers that were drunk from contain saliva on the rim. Clothing items left behind contain skin cells and possibly hair. Even surfaces where someone sat for extended periods can yield DNA from skin cells that naturally shed. The FBI would systematically collect all potential DNA sources and submit them for laboratory analysis. Fourth, trace evidence collection. Fibers from clothing, hair, soil tracked in on shoes, anything that might have been transferred from the occupant to the house or vice versa. If someone spent hours in that vacant house over multiple days conducting surveillance, they left traces. They left fibers from their clothing on surfaces they contacted. They tracked in dirt or debris from outside. They shed hair. All of that microscopic evidence can be collected and analyzed. Fifth, reconstruction of activities. Based on disturbed dust patterns, positioning of furniture, evidence of where someone spent time, FBI analysts can reconstruct what the occupant was doing. If a chair is positioned directly at a window facing Nancy's house with disturbed dust, showing someone sat there repeatedly, that's evidence of observation. If food and drink containers are concentrated in one room that has the best view of Nancy's property, that shows extended surveillance sessions. If there's evidence of writing or note-taking materials, that suggests the occupant was documenting observations. All of that reconstruction helps establish intent and purpose. The SWAT commander explained that even if the FBI doesn't find fingerprints or DNA that match someone in criminal databases, the evidence from the vacant house is still valuable. It establishes that surveillance occurred. It shows where the surveillance happened from. It demonstrates the crime was planned and targeted rather than random. And it provides something to compare against suspects developed through other investigative means. If investigators identify a suspect through different evidence and that suspect's fingerprints or DNA match what was found in the vacant house, that's powerful corroboration connecting them to the surveillance that preceded Nancy's abduction. The FBI would also work with the homeowners of the vacant house to establish timeline and access information. When exactly was the house vacant? When did the owners leave and when did they return? Who had keys to the property? Did any service providers have access? Was the house listed for sale or rent? Did any real estate agents show the property? All of those questions help narrow when the surveillance could have occurred and who might have had legitimate or illegitimate access. The SWAT commander emphasized that the FBI would also canvass neighbors specifically about the vacant house with targeted questions. Did you notice any vehicles in the driveway of the vacant house? Did you see any lights on inside? Did you notice anyone coming or going? Did you see anything that seemed unusual or out of place? Even small observations like, "I saw a truck there one afternoon," can be significant. If that truck description matches a vehicle connected to a suspect, it's corroboration. If neighbors noticed activity at the vacant house during specific dates, that helps establish timeline. If someone saw a person entering or leaving and can provide a description, that's investigative gold. Now let's examine what the surveillance from next door would have shown about Nancy's routine in the days before she disappeared. This is where the SWAT commander's tactical experience really illuminates the operational planning that went into this crime. Surveillance over multiple days would have shown that Nancy's routine was consistent and predictable. On January 31st, the day Nancy disappeared, she left her house in an Uber in the afternoon to go to her daughter Annie's house. That departure and the fact she'd be gone for hours would have been observable from next door. Someone watching would have seen Nancy get into an Uber and leave. They'd have seen the house go dark, lights off, no one home. They'd know Nancy would be gone for extended period based on prior observation of her visiting patterns. When Nancy returned home around 10 p.m., driven by her son-in-law Tommaso, that arrival would have been observable. Someone watching from next door would have seen the vehicle pull into the driveway, would have seen Nancy and Tommaso get out, would have seen Nancy go inside, would have seen Tommaso leave shortly after, would have seen lights come on inside as Nancy settled in for the night, would have seen those lights go off within an hour or so as Nancy went to bed. All of that observation from the vacant house next door gives you real-time intelligence about exactly when Nancy is home alone and exactly when she goes to sleep. The SWAT commander pointed out that the timing of the abduction at 2:12 a.m. makes perfect sense from a surveillance perspective. Nancy returned home around 10 p.m. Lights went off by 11 p.m. or shortly after as she went to bed. Waiting until after 2 a.m. ensures she's deeply asleep, ensures the neighborhood is quiet, ensures minimal chance of witnesses being awake and noticing activity. That timing isn't random. That timing is calculated based on knowing Nancy's sleep schedule and knowing optimal windows for operation. And you know those things from watching, from surveillance, from the observations conducted from the vacant house next door. The fact that the abduction was executed so efficiently in the 16-minute window from 2:12 a.m., motion detection to 2:28 a.m., pacemaker disconnect also reflects planning informed by surveillance. You can't move that efficiently through a plan unless you've thought through every step, unless you know the layout, unless you've positioned your vehicle exactly right, unless you've anticipated variables and prepared responses. All of that planning requires intelligence, requires knowing what you're dealing with before you get there. And surveillance from next door provides that intelligence in detail sufficient to plan every movement. The SWAT commander also noted that surveillance from next door would have revealed something else critical. whether Nancy had security beyond just the doorbell camera. Watching the house over multiple days, you'd see whether an alarm system is armed at night. You'd see this by watching for indicator lights on alarm panels visible through windows. You'd learn whether Nancy checks locks before bed or is casual about security. You'd see whether anyone else has regular access, like a caregiver who comes daily or family who visits frequently and might notice if something is wrong. All of that intelligence informs risk assessment. If Nancy has extensive security, if people check on her regularly, if the house is a hard target, you might choose a different target. But if surveillance reveals Nancy is isolated, has minimal security, follows predictable routine, that makes her a soft target, an achievable target worth the risk of abduction. What disturbs the SWAT commander most about this case is how vulnerable Nancy was, and how preventable this might have been if the vacant house next door hadn't been available as a surveillance post. In an ideal scenario, vacant houses are secured properly and checked regularly. Neighbors notice unusual activity and report it. Property owners or their agents conduct periodic inspections. Security systems monitor for unauthorized entry. But in reality, vacant houses are often exactly what criminals need: access points for observation, staging areas for operations, locations where they can operate with minimal risk of detection. And in Nancy's case, the vacant house next door provided everything the abductor needed to gather intelligence and plan a successful targeted kidnapping. The evidence from the vacant house also potentially answers questions about how the abductor knew details that have puzzled investigators and analysts. How did they know about the doorbell camera and where it was positioned? Observable from next door during daytime surveillance. How did they know Nancy lived alone? Observable from watching who comes and goes over multiple days. How did they know Nancy's mobility was limited? Observable from watching her move around. How did they know the optimal vehicle positioning on the driveway? Observable from watching where vehicles park normally. Every question about how the abductor had such detailed knowledge is answered by surveillance from the vacant house next door. True Crime Vault provides expert analysis from professionals who understand criminal operations. Subscribe and turn on all notifications. Like this video to support investigative journalism that brings tactical perspectives. Share this video because someone might know about activity at the vacant house, might have seen something suspicious, might be able to provide information to investigators. Comment with your thoughts on whether this explains how the abduction was planned so precisely. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 49 days. The evidence from the house next door might be the key to identifying who took her. Let's examine what this surveillance evidence tells us about the type of person who abducted Nancy. The SWAT commander's assessment, based on 30 years of tactical experience, is that this was not an impulsive criminal. This was not someone who randomly targeted Nancy. This was someone methodical and patient, someone willing to invest time in surveillance, someone who understood the value of intelligence and reconnaissance, someone who knew that proper planning prevents poor performance, to use the military phrase. That mindset, that operational approach, narrows the profile significantly. Career criminals who commit targeted crimes understand surveillance. They know you watch before you act. They know you gather intelligence before you move. Opportunistic criminals, in contrast, act on impulse. They see opportunity in the moment and take it without extensive planning. The surveillance from the vacant house proves this wasn't opportunistic. This was premeditated. This was calculated. This was professional in its planning, even if the execution had elements that suggest the perpetrator wasn't professionally trained in law enforcement or military operations. The SWAT commander noted several indicators from the overall evidence that suggest sophisticated planning combined with tactical limitations. The sophisticated planning is evident in the surveillance, in the timing of the abduction, in the positioning of the vehicle, in the efficiency of the 16-minute execution. The tactical limitations are evident in things like the gun holster positioning, which former FBI agent Johnny Grusing noted was not tactically sound, suggesting someone who bought equipment but doesn't have professional training in how to use it properly. That combination, sophisticated planning but amateur execution of some elements, suggests someone who is intelligent and methodical but doesn't have formal tactical training. Someone who learned from research or experience but isn't former military or law enforcement. The vacant house surveillance also tells us this person was comfortable operating alone or with minimal help. Surveillance from a vacant house doesn't require multiple people. One person can sit and watch. One person can document observations. one person can gather all the intelligence needed. If this was a larger operation involving multiple conspirators, you'd expect more sophisticated surveillance methods, electronic monitoring, multiple observation posts, digital recording of Nancy's routine. But the evidence suggests simple direct observation from the vacant house. That simplicity suggests a small operation, one person conducting surveillance. Maybe one or two people total involved in the entire crime, which aligns with former Detective Morgan Wright's assessment based on the $1.2 million reward, not generating tips that only 2 people maximum are involved. The SWAT commander believes the evidence from the vacant house combined with everything else known about this case points toward identification being possible and probable, because whoever conducted that surveillance left evidence. Left fingerprints or DNA or trace evidence that can be collected and analyzed. And when that evidence is compared against suspects developed through other investigative avenues, through systematic examination of everyone who had access to the neighborhood, through analysis of service providers who worked in the area, through cell phone data showing whose phones were present at relevant times, convergence will occur. Multiple independent evidence streams will point to the same person. And when that happens, identification becomes arrest, becomes prosecution, becomes justice. What the FBI found in the house next door isn't just interesting background information. It's actionable evidence. It's a location that can be processed forensically. It's a connection point between the perpetrator and Nancy's property. It's proof that surveillance occurred. It's demonstration that this crime was planned rather than spontaneous. And all of that evidence creates investigative opportunities, creates leads to follow, creates tests to run, creates comparisons to make. The vacant house next door has become a critical element of this investigation because whoever spent time there watching Nancy left pieces of themselves behind, left evidence that forensic science can trace back to them. Nancy Guthrie disappeared 49 days ago. For 49 days, investigators have worked to understand who took her and why. The discovery of surveillance evidence in the vacant house next door provides answers to fundamental questions about how this crime was possible, how someone knew Nancy's routine, how someone understood her vulnerabilities, how someone planned the timing and execution so precisely. The answer was in the house next door, in the vacant property that provided the perfect vantage point, in the observation post where someone watched and learned and prepared, and in the evidence left behind in that house, in the fingerprints and DNA and traces that mark the surveiller's presence, lies the path to identification. The FBI found something in the house next door, something that changes everything, something that explains the how and points toward the who, and that something, that evidence of surveillance, might be exactly what's needed to bring Nancy home and hold those responsible accountable for what they've done.